What's up, all you beautiful people? Welcome to another video. Today, I want to talk about what is, in my opinion, the single reason most people do not achieve big things in life. Hell, it's the reason why they don't even, in a lot of cases, achieve small, inconsequential, tiny things. It's because they have an unrealistic expectation about how hard or how long or how much energy a goal should require of you to put in before you can achieve it. Over and over in my life, I've had to, as I've leveled up and gone to a new level of success in whatever domain that is, whether that's physical health and that's relationship, it's in a business, at each level, I had to go through this recalibration process where what I considered to be a reasonable amount of input to get to my desired output had to completely transmogrify. And there's a couple of different ways I'm going to share with you guys at the end of this video that you can do that, how you can recalibrate your expectations to be more in alignment with what is actually going to be required. But first, I want to share with you three distinct stories from my own life that I think will help you see like the truth behind what I'm sharing with you, which is that if you were just to give something more time, more reps, and more effort, you would eventually, on a long enough time frame, achieve that goal. But the timeline that you might consider to be reasonable is maybe orders of magnitude larger than you're currently you're considering. So the first place that I really ran up against this idea of recalibrating how hard something was in the world of climbing. And the reason this is top of mind right now is because Anuj, yesterday or the day before, went to the climbing gym. He had watched this video of this guy climbing this Red Bull stunt. They're flying this plane and they put these holds underneath the plane wings, and then he, with a parachute, would go out mid-flight and try to climb this airplane. And when he'd fall, he'd fall with his chute and he'd pull the chute. So Anuj said, "Hey, they're saying that this is an 8A." And that only like 10% of people can even do this. And so he's like, I'm really tempted now to go to the climbing gym and like I want to feel like what would an 8A actually feel like. And I told him, like, I didn't hold anything back. I didn't call him. I wasn't like, you can do it, big guy. I told him just quite frankly that the reality is right now it's unlikely that he would even be able to pull off the ground and do a single move on an 8A. But that within like, if he was to dedicate himself consistently to this craft, then maybe within like 2-3 years, he could do all the individual moves on that route. Doesn't mean that he could link the moves, but he could do the individual moves. And then maybe with another 2 to 3 years, he could actually climb that 13A. So he got a bug up his butt. He went to the climbing gym to prove me wrong, or not even to prove me wrong, I'm not sure, but just probably wanted to test it, like actually see, okay, what's the hullabaloo here? And sure enough, he sends a video back over. He can't even pull off the ground, right? Because like people underestimate, I don't even think he was underestimating, but like that's like the first grade in climbing where it gets really hard, where it gets to expert level. And you start to realize there are levels to this game. Now here, when I started my climbing career, like a lot of you guys might not know, I was a former semi-professional rock climber. That's what I did for the better part of a decade. And when I first started climbing in the first 2 years, I was kind of just naturally gifted. I was very good. I progressed very rapidly. I climbed a lot. I climbed every single day for 2 years straight, every day. I lived in the gym and I was training hard consistently. And by the end of that period, I was climbing in that 13A range. So I was like at the lower level of like expert by that point. And what was interesting is I had a lot of ego tied up in climbing at that point, because in climbing, there is more prestige, more clout associated with how quickly you can climb hard things. So a person who can climb the hard route in one go has more clout than somebody who it takes them 100 goes, right? So what I was doing at that point in my climbing was I wasn't actually fully challenging myself. What I was trying to do was I was only doing things that I knew I could do in 1 or 2 tries, because I wanted to maintain like this aura, this clout of like, oh, look, I can climb hard things without even trying very hard, right? Like there's a lot of people in life that like take pride in the fact that, oh, I achieved this thing without having to try very hard. And we have a word for this in video gaming, right? Where it's like, you worked really hard to become good. People call you a tryhard, right? As like an offensive slur. And in the climbing community in particular, this was like a subculture back in the early 2000s where people didn't really take training seriously and didn't take the idea of like going really putting a lot of effort into a thing, or at least the people I was surrounded with at that point in my journey, they weren't. Until I ran into this guy, and he was a local like legend here in the Twin Cities. He had developed this crag. So what I mean by developed is he'd go out there with his drill and he'd drill holes in and he'd put the bolts in, and then it became this climbing area for everybody to go and enjoy. And he told me a story, you know, I was sharing and kind of like comparing his abilities to my abilities, because this is what the young guns do in any sport, right? We compare ourselves to the guys that have been doing it for years, decades, or older, and we're like, where do I stack up against this guy? He didn't give a shit. He wasn't in a competition comparison mood, but I was. So I was like, oh, how long? Like, tell me about that route. And he said something that like completely blew my mind. He goes, oh, I've been working on that for a decade. And I was like, at that point, I had never spent more than like 10 tries on a climb. That would maybe be 2 or 3 sessions spread over a couple of weeks or a month, right? That was my expectation of trying hard. So to hear him say he had been working on something for a decade and still hadn't done it, I was like, that's buck wild, right? But as I got more immersed in the climbing culture, I kept running into this over and over and over again. These people who are at the pinnacle of the sport, the absolute best at climbers. Over and over, they would share stories of these multi-year projects, things where they're like, when I first started working on that 7 years ago, I couldn't do a single move. And then 2 years later, I finally did all the moves in isolation. And it took me another 3 years before I started linking, and another 2 years after that before I did it in 2 distinct sections. And it took me another 3 years after that before I finally sent it. Like, there's a great movie called The Dawn Wall with Tommy Caldwell and Kevin Jorgensen, where they're projecting one of these types of climbs, where Tommy had been working on this thing for, I think it was close to a decade, maybe a little bit longer actually. Like, he's one of the best climbers in the world that's ever lived at that style of climbing. And it had taken him like the better part of his adult life. It's crazy the amount of effort that goes into these projects. But what you learn from this then is when you commit to finding the edge of your capacity, like, it is a process that will take you not days, not weeks, not months, but it will take you years, if not decades. And so that was the very first really big reframe. The second big reframe was when I was about 28 years old. I sat down with the parents of the woman that I was going to propose to, and I asked them if I could marry their daughter. And their mom, she said to me, like, what are you going to do to provide for our daughter? Up to that point, I'd just been a rock climber. I'd been, climbing rocks. That sounds great, but it's a great way to challenge yourself, great personal development, great experiences, not great financially. And so I left that conversation with a bit of a chip on my shoulder and trying to figure out, okay, what can I do to provide? What could I do to make money in the world? And for whatever reason, the first person that came to my mind was Stephen King. I was like, Stephen King makes money. Maybe I could be the next Stephen King. I'll just start writing fiction books, right? So I did a little bit of research to try and figure out, okay, like, what would be a reasonable amount of work before I could expect to be a published author, before I could be making some money, right? And so I went deep into this. I started looking at all of the authors that I admired. I was like, okay, how many books have they published? How long did it take them to get their first book published? How long had they been writing before that? All that stuff, right? And there's this idea, I think it was put forth by Malcolm Gladwell in his book Outliers, that, behind all outliers, there's a roughly 10,000 hours of deliberate practice that they put into their craft. And so taking that into consideration, with writing, it doesn't quite transfer in that way, because you could spend an hour writing but only put 5 words on the page, right? So in writing, what they actually do is they say words, like, how many words do you have to write before you get the bad words out and you start finding some good words? And the general consensus that I found at that time was 1 million words. You needed to write roughly 1 million words to get the shitty stuff out and start to find your voice and start to develop your craft. 1 million words is a lot of freaking words. Like, for context, the average novel is 65,000 words. So 1 million words is like, you have to write like 15 novels. That's no joke, right? But I was like committed to making this craft, this pursuit, this career work. And so I reverse engineered and I said, I want to dedicate the next year to this thing and getting as good as I can, getting the shitty reps out as fast as I can, so I can get good scrub and maybe start focusing on actually writing some good stuff into year 2 and 3. And so for that, I reverse engineered and said, okay, 1 million words in a single year. If I was to write that, how many words per day would that be? And that's roughly 3,000 words. It's a little bit less than that, but that was the objective that I set for myself. I'm going to write 3,000 words every single day. Now, for context, I write like, at that time, I was probably writing 800 to 1,000 words an hour. So that's like a solid 4 to 5 hours of writing, not even including the breaks that I have to take in between of that. That's like, I was having to wake up really early and put in a couple of hours before I lived my life and went to work because I was working at a climbing gym. And I had to put in a couple hours at the end of the day. Like, that's a lot of writing. It was a lot of writing, but what ended up happening is by the end of that year, I was in a place where I was actually getting pretty good at like writing fiction. And so 6 months after that, I actually had my first novel published. 6 months after that, I had my second novel published. So like things start to spiral and compound really quickly, but it required a tremendous amount of effort on the front end to get good enough to even like have the opportunity to get published. So that was story number 2 of recalibrating expectations. The third one is around content creation. So we work with, you know, some of our best students. We bring in and we help them with their content systems, their content creation, right? And we have one student who we've been helping him with his YouTube in particular. And we have over the last, I think 9 months, we've put out around 25 videos with him. Okay. 25 videos, brand new channel. And about a month ago, one of those videos popped off. It did like 23,000 views for a channel that had like 100 subscribers, right? So overnight, he has this outlier success on one of the videos. His channel goes from 100 subscribers to like 900 subscribers. It goes from an average view per video of like 200 to 500 views to suddenly, boom, everything's like popping off and going great. Huzzah. So he, in one of our calls the other day, he goes, it's about time. It's good to see things finally starting to work. And I was just like, what do you mean finally starting to work? Dude, we only published 25 videos. And it's like, yeah, but it's been taking 9 months. I'm like, dude, let me recalibrate you for a second. I have on this channel that you're watching, Amplified Impact, put out over 1,000 videos. 1,000 videos for the last 1,000 days. That's not even counting the main YouTube channel, which has another 60 videos, each one of which requires a tremendous amount of effort. Doesn't even take into consideration the other podcast that I did, Multifamily Investing Made Simple, which had 500 episodes and was all around real estate. Doesn't even take into consideration Brain Dump, which I did with my friend Austin Linney, where we put out 60 episodes. Doesn't even take into consideration the 365 videos that I put out on Instagram, as I did a video every single day back in 2019, 2020, whatever it was, right? I've put out over 2,000 videos over the last 5-6 years. And it's only been in the last 3 years that we finally started like really going gangbusters, right? And so when I sit here and I think like 25 videos, dude, that's fantastic. If this had taken 200 videos, that still would have been fantastic. So like recalibrate your expectations. You just hit a grand slam, like huzzah, right? And this is the reason. At the end of the day, why you want to work with coaches, consultants, people who have done the things, because they can accelerate the learning process, right? They can compress decades of learning. Instead of having to put out 2,000 videos like me, I can help you hopefully do it in 200 videos, 10 times less. Or in the case of this guy with 20 videos, which is like 1/100th as many videos, right? So that's the first way. If you want to recalibrate your expectations, I would recommend doing that, is go surround yourself with people on the level that you're trying to get to. So go find somebody who has put out 2,000 videos, who has written 1,000,000 words, who has, climbed that thing and put in 1,000,000 efforts onto it. Like, go find those people. You usually have to pay them because they're a coach, they're a consultant, or a community of people that are doing something similar. Go pay to be around those people. Now, if you're cheap and you don't want to spend money, go read a biography. Like, seriously, biographies of like Edison, of James Dyson, the guy who like created the vacuum cleaner. Like, you might not realize it, but that took him like 30 plus years. He started that company when he was like, 30. And then it didn't actually succeed until he was like 65. And he had went through thousands of repetitions and iterations on that innovation before it was finally the Dyson vacuum cleaner as we know it and love it today. And now that guy is like the sole owner of a multi-billion-dollar company. So go read those stories of other people who have put in tremendous amount of effort to help you recalibrate what would be a reasonable amount of time and energy that you could expect to put into a thing. The second way to do this is to take whatever number you're currently expecting, or whatever that is. Like, I want to put out 20 videos and I want to break whatever, right? Take whatever that number is and then multiply it by 100. Now, that might be overkill. Like, it might not take you 2,000 videos to succeed. It didn't take me 2,000 videos, right? It took me probably around 1,000, all things told. But if I had gone to it thinking I'm only going to do 10 videos, I definitely would have quit too soon. If I had thought I was going to do it in 100 videos, it would have been too soon, right? So you need to like give yourself a wildly large expectation for how long it's going to take you. And then if you do it sooner, that's great. But like the reason most people fail isn't because like they're not good enough. It's just they didn't do the thing long enough. They just quit too soon, right? So take whatever number it is, multiply it by 100. You'll probably get there sooner, but set that as the expectation. Like truthfully, when I started doing content, I told myself, I don't expect to be good at this until I've done 10,000 videos. Right? We talk about 10,000 hours. My thing, like I've never really articulated this, is that if I still suck at this game, if I haven't crushed the media landscape by the time I've done 10,000 videos, okay, maybe it's time to hang it up, right? I'm 1/5 of the way there. Been doing it for 5 years. So give me another 20 years. We'll check back in and see where we're at. I don't know, man. I got a pretty good feeling on a 30, 20 year horizon, things are going to work out. So that is today's lesson. I hope this serves you guys. Let me know down in the comments, what is like a time from your own personal life where you have had your expectations of what's required completely recalibrated? Put that down in the comments so we can see your story. We can share from that. It can help us on our journey. And I will see you, beautiful people, in the next video.